am. As Ishay said, I am Beth Brodowski, and I run a company called Iris Creative. And I'm actually super excited that I quit my job on Halloween 25 years ago. And so I've actually been running the company for a really, really long time. I worked at a nonprofit. We did publications and marketing in the medical device safety sector. Sandra, oh, that's great that you were there. That is awesome. And so over the years, as we've built our practice and really narrowed in on our nonprofit work, we help people build audience-centered brands. And in doing that, I realized that we do some different graphic design work, we do marketing, we do a bunch of things that all kind of rolls up to helping people get really clear on their message, their mission, their audience, all of that kind of stuff. And not everyone can work with us. We're a small firm, we're boutique, and not everybody in your world has the budget to do things. So in addition to our agency work, we also teach classes all the time. Every single month we have classes that are going out, because I think it's so important for people that are working in-house, in marketing, in nonprofits, to feel like you're a pro at that side of your job. A lot of times people that end up doing marketing at nonprofits come from completely different backgrounds. One of the funny questions I always ask people is like, tell me what your major was in college. And the amount of you guys that do nonprofit marketing and communications and development work that were theater majors, surprisingly high. So that's my background. We also did a podcast for 4 or 5 years, all around the idea of what drives participation in nonprofits. And so a lot of the work that we're doing now is really coming out of what we learned through talking to over 200 people across the country over 5 years, and taking the things that are working in your practices and molding them into how we end up working with our clients. So today we're going to, start talking about branding and what branding means and how that then gets deployed through kind of executional marketing. So when we think about branding, most often people think of a logo. A lot of the time people think of the logo that is affiliated or attached to an organization. And I'm sure that every one of you could name all of these companies right now. These are pretty famous brands, pretty famous logos attached to those brands. And it's very easy when we're talking about branding to think, this is it, like this is the company, it's this brand. But it's often surprising to realize that those brands evolve. And what you may see now and think of and be attached to as a brand logo, a brand identity, which what we're going to be talking about today, often started out very, very far. I mean, can you imagine that was Twitter's original logo? And while Apple has had different versions of their Apple since, I think, 1976, before that, this was their logo on the bottom left, completely different. Starbucks had a brown mermaid logo. They've evolved and they've evolved and they've evolved. And this is one I love, the Olympics logo. They've had the rings, but it looked different. So brands evolve over time. And it's so important that when you think about your organization and your brand, that you are continuing to evolve. However, the brand is not the logo. The brand is so much bigger than that. And it really starts, what I believe, is with your audience first. Who do you exist to serve? Who is your most important community that you need to connect with? The question I often ask our people is, whom do you need to thrive? Who are the people that you need in your orbit, in your community, paying attention in order for you to really go out and serve and do the work that you're intended to do? So getting real deep clarity on that audience, and on that audience deeper than I would call it a category heading. A lot of times people say, well, we need to reach a new audience. We want millennials. We want a different demographic than we have right now. And it's easy to put a label. We need to reach lawyers or whatever it is. We need to reach girls that are ages 12 to 18. That's a label. That's a category. That's maybe even what you might call a segment. but an audience is a deep understanding of the people behind the labels and what they care about and what they value. So it starts with knowing, what do you need to make these people happy? A lot of times, one of my favorite stories about really getting to know your audience is about these two sisters. And they were both baking, and they had one orange. And for the purpose of the story, there's one orange in the world. And so they had this one orange and they wanted to bake something, and they were fighting over who gets to use the orange. And so as it turned out, the mother said, that's it, stop fighting. I'm going to cut the orange in half. And that way you'll both get equal parts of the orange. Everyone should be happy. But they weren't happy because it didn't solve their problem. As it turned out, one sister wanted the rind to grate into her icing, and the other sister wanted the juice to squeeze into her batter. And to me, that's one of my favorite stories. I actually learned it in a negotiation clinic, but I said, that's not a negotiation story. That's a branding story. If you don't understand what someone wants, you cannot possibly deliver it to them. And so that's the key. You've got to start there. And then from there, once you know your audience, then you can develop a message. People often say, well, we have a problem with our messaging. Can you fix that? Well, the answer is no. I can't fix your messaging until I understand who you want to connect with, who you want to reach with. You've got to understand your audience. If you don't know your audience and you don't understand what drives them, what motivates them, what they care about, you can do copywriting, but you can't do messaging, because a message really helps you get to, oh, I understand what you're looking for, and here's how we deliver it. We often like to say it gets past the what and into the why. Into the why. Why do people participate? And that's really where brand lives. And then moving forward into the third step of branding is image, visual identity, the things we're going to be talking more about today. But it's important to note that this is step 3 out of 4 steps of branding. It's not the sum total of it. It's your logo. It's your brand guide. It's your how you present yourself out in the world. And we like to call that your brand hook. That's the things that help people remember and recall you, so that they can associate what they see with what they hear, and then ultimately with what they experience. And this is one of the critical aspects of brand that's almost never talked about. Audience, yes, marketing people talk about audience. Message, image, yes, those are all marketing words that we tend to talk about. But the reality is that your brand lives in the experience that people have. I often say it's not what you show, what you say, and what you do. It's what people hear, what they experience, what they see. So it's how they receive what you're putting out there. And when I talk about it this way, people say, well, what's the point of branding? What's the point of branding if I can't control it? And it's really just what they see. You know, any of us that have children have probably had that experience where you told your kid what to do. You told your kid what to do, but they don't hear it that way. And they say something to you like, well, you didn't say this. I have a second child that his nickname is Mr. Loophole, because he always manages to find some pathway that gets in between what I actually said and what my intention was, and find a way to spin it to, well, you didn't actually tell me not to do this specific thing. And so there's that gap between what people hear and what you're actually saying. And so that experience piece is, how do you work to bring that together? And so you can't let your brand just be about your image. You can't let your brand just be about what you're saying and what you're showing. You've got to wrap it with deeply understanding your audience. And then on the far side, delivering them the experience that they are wanting and that you promised them. So today we're going to talk about these things, but through the lens of the idea that you have a logo. What do you do next? How do you take this kind of core image and extrapolate this out into the messaging that you need to do for your brand? So let's start here. All right, we've got our chat up. When you look at this picture, do you know what company I'm showing you here? Can you take a guess on You know, what business is this? Do you all know? Yes. Yeah, you guys all got it right away. Okay, so exactly. This is Home Depot. So tell me, how did you know? What were the markers? What were the things that when you looked at this picture instantly, okay, the color, exactly. The color, the product, exactly the font, the consistency, and just the pervasiveness of the color, right? And here's the thing, and those of you guys that are saying, oh, I love it, how overwhelmed I felt. Jamie, that's great. The signage, the layout of the store. Yes, look at the consistency. So they have this one font, this stencil font that they use for their logo, but then they use, this is Helvetica that they're using in all of their signage throughout. They're using the same color graphics. They're using, as you can see, they've got a treatment for an icon on different pieces. But if you look over on the left side of the screen, do you see all of the stacks of orange buckets? So it goes beyond just their signage. Those of you that are saying it's not just that, it's the product as well. When they're creating products for themselves, it's all this orange. So now, okay, so Jamie said how overwhelmed I felt. What the rest of you, if you were going to put an adjective towards this brand, so imagine Home Depot was a person, what's the adjective that you would use to describe the person of Home Depot? How does it make you feel? What do you think of when you come to this? Loud, DIY, organized. Yeah, these are great. Busy, consistent, awesome. And so this is that brand. This is that. And so when you think of this, some of you are probably people that are very attracted to this brand, and this is where you want to shop. You go because you know you can find exactly what you want. Some of you might say, this is not where I'm going. Maybe you're a Lowe's customer because that's really what you want to be. And Lowe's and Home Depot actually are really looking for a very different audience. Home Depot came out of the contractors world. Lowe's is much more focused on the home decorator, the person that watches HGTV, different audience, and their look, their design, how they visually display things works in alignment with the fact that they're looking for somebody different, and they're looking for somebody that wants something different. Okay, now, anybody know who this brand is? This is not even showing their product. It's completely different, but exactly. All right, so this is Tiffany. This is Tiffany and Company, which on the surface, is a jewelry store. So now this is actually their cafe in New York City. I mean, if any company leans into a color like this now, okay, tell me, when you look at this and all of this aqua color, do you feel overwhelmed in the same way that the Home Depot store made you feel overwhelmed? Or do you feel, basked in luxury? When you look at this, what's that one word? What adjective would you use to describe Tiffany? Luxurious and serene. I love it. At peace. Privileged. Oh, and privileged, that could be a positive word or not a positive word. Depends. Calming, pretty, cool, opulent. Oh, that's a great word. Exclusive. Yes. So here's the thing. Some of this comes from, shall we say, the window dressing, the brand hooks, the clean and perfectly typeset typography. That is a black logo with a larger initial cap that's set in small caps. It is on the surface a very simple logo. If you were dropped here from another planet and you just saw the Tiffany and Company logo, it wouldn't tell you anything about what they do. Would that logo in and of itself tell you all of these words? So just from their logo again, do you get prestigious, exclusive, opulent? Yes. Okay. So some of you say yes. Others might say, I don't know, maybe, but it certainly doesn't say, hey, we're a jewelry company. So they have expanded their language of what branding means beyond just the logo. They have both of these companies, both Home Depot and Tiffany, have owned their color, and they've really created the experience. And their audiences probably are very, very different. I mean, they're either very different people, or it's also possible that they're the same people who are at a very different mindset when they're shopping at different places. You know, a Home Depot customer absolutely could be a Tiffany customer. And this is what's so important about your audience. You can't get locked into looking at something as a demographic. You've really got to be looking at, what do people care about? What are they looking for? Why are they coming to you? And while these are for-profit companies, the same concept holds true for everyone. These are kind of universal truths. So some of the ways we do that in branding is with brand colors and creating what we would call a brand palette. Now, a lot of times the brand palette starts with your logo. UNICEF did a rebranding within the last 2 years, and their logo is still this cyan, this bright Pantone blue. And then they have kind of whites and grays, a very neutral blue plus black and gray and white. Simple, simple color palette. They could have said, that's us. We're going to use photographs and we're going to use these, 5 colors, and that's it. But they decided that that's not who they wanted to be. They wanted to have more variety and more options. The more colors, the more you add into your color palette, you get more choice. However, with more choice comes more diversity, more range from your brand. And you really need to think about it when you're designing your color palette. Are you an organization that does enough media, has enough exposure, can be in front of your community enough so that if you start changing things up all the time, they're still going to recognize that it's you? Take, for example, the Google Doodle. If you go into Google, many days, not every day, but many days, Google constantly is changing. But people are so familiar with Google. It's so ubiquitous in our lives that you could completely change. They've even had children design the Google Doodle. It can look completely different and people still know it's Google. They still know it's Google because they get what Google is doing. Not everyone has that depth of awareness with their audience that it is appropriate to go too far out. So you want to think about, do we need a tight color palette? Do we need a wider color palette for all the things that we want to do? And if so, do we need to make rules about it? A lot of times, like, this is called an extended color palette, but we also sometimes do them where they're called secondary color palettes. And there's rules around only being allowed to use those secondary colors as highlight colors or in certain circumstances. Here's another example. So this is another global organization, huge organization, United Way. I don't know if they're global, but they're definitely national. So they're a really, really big organization, and they don't have a secondary color palette. Their color palette was these 4 main colors. And as you can see, the darkest one of the lot is this blue, which isn't even really a dark color. They're really 4 bright colors that have a very similar value. That's really hard in design when you're dealing with colors that all have like an equal level of intensity. And so we had to make micro changes to some work that we did with them in order to be able to get a range of a color palette in order to create the kind of work that we needed. So we made small changes that weren't necessarily creating a secondary color palette, but were really a minor expansion to give us some depth and breadth in order to design. So we took their darkest blue and we added some black to it to make what's called a tone, darkening it, which allowed us to get some kind of darkness, some range of contrast on the dark end. And then we took their orange and their kind of goldeny yellow color and lightened them, made them what's called a tint, and then an even lighter tint for the yellow, so that we had a wider playbook of a color range without saying, well, now we're going to put in a green or a black or a brown, or expanding their color palette. So visually, someone who sees this doesn't immediately say, oh, there's more colors. It feels harmonious in their core color palette, but gives us a broader design palette. Does that make sense? So this is one of my favorite slides. I use this slide in lots of presentations I do, and almost all the time, people tell me it was their favorite slide of the entire presentation. So when you have a color palette you're working with and you're moving into design, figuring out how to use those colors is really important. It's very easy to create a design circus, a color circus, and just putting especially if you have all these bright colors. So when you're thinking about design, think about having one color that's 60% of your design, another color that's 30% of your design, and a third color that's 10% of your design. So think of it as dominant, subdominant, and subordinate. And that may mean a big block of a color area, but it could mean something completely different. Maybe you have graphics that are that color. Maybe it's your typography that's a different color. It can be related to size or shape or density. There's lots of different ways to look at it. But if we call it the 60-30-10 rule, 60-30-10. So if you're looking at your page when you're designing something, think about how you're utilizing color. You don't want to just kind of spray the color around in equal amounts, even if you're working within your color palette, because it's not going to give you a sense of visual impact. Okay, so now typography, the next place where we, get into chaos, right? Fonts are fun. We all love fonts, and there are a gazillion free fonts out there. When I learned how to be a designer, I had 3 fonts to work with because it was a hard-coded machine that you had to purchase fonts for thousands of dollars. It then got programmed into the machine, and the company could only afford 3 fonts. So that was it. Everything I had to do was within these 3 fonts. And I have to say, I'm a believer that creativity can come from constraints. You actually almost need some constraints in order to be creative. And so there's all these different types of fonts out there: serif fonts, sans serif fonts, slab serif fonts, handwriting fonts, script, a million different things. As you're thinking about deploying your brand and creating a brand that is manageable, that isn't going to spin out of control, and you're going to be standing in the back of a presentation that one of your staff is giving going, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that, because that happens. You want to make rules. You want to create some constraints around what's possible. If you have a fancy font, say, well, that can be used in a newsletter or on an invitation. But coming up with a set of fonts that works and can be consistently used. One of the things I always recommend is choosing a font family. A font family means lightweight, regular weight, book weight, heavyweight, italic, bold, ultra. Like, it has lots of different weights and also lots of different widths, which means like everything from condensed to narrow to normal to wide to sometimes even ultra wide. So if you have all of those different styles, all of those different their weights of fonts is what we call them, even within one font, you will still get a lot of variety, even if you narrow down to 1 or 2 or at most 3 fonts that are part of your brand. Because this is what happens when you don't. Right? Things go crazy. So on this design, there are 5 different fonts, 5 different fonts. And in addition to having 5 different fonts, there are multiple different colors, multiple different styles. They kind of just threw everything at it. We call this, you don't need to do bold, underline, italic, and red in order to make your point. And when you do a little bit of everything, treating everything, as special, then nothing is special. It's like, it all starts looking like Las Vegas, where everything is lit up and screaming. And, if one building in Las Vegas was picked up and put into your hometown, it would be really spectacular. But as a whole, Las Vegas kind of all blends together in a mishmash. And I always joke that like maybe a brick building is what would stand out in Las Vegas. Every single thing here has priority and attention. So that ends up meaning that nothing is getting priority and attention. Be judicious with your use of highlights and fancy fonts. So now moving into the idea of imagery. So photography is often something that's forgotten about as a piece of your brand. So often we're just documenting what we have, somebody gave us lots of money. Let's take a photo with the big check, check it off. Yes, we got that thing. But photography, when thought through mindfully, can be a really key component of your brand. So in looking at these images, Does anyone have a guess? Do you know who these images belong to? Who represents themselves with imagery like this? Good guess. Keep guessing. Let's see. Vision. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so Kathleen got it. It's Charity Water. So Charity Water, and if you look at it, this is their logo. So they have this yellow tank as part of their logo. And so they utilize this yellow tank in a lot of their photography. But beyond the yellow tank, they also often use, like, there's a piece of yellow equipment in the picture on the top right. There's maybe pictures where there's yellow flowers or yellow clothing. They bring this yellow element into their imagery so that it really becomes embedded and part of the language that they're creating as part of their brand. Does anyone remember these campaigns back in the day? So I'm calling you all out for how old, if you're as old as me. So I can't remember I think it was in the 90s. This campaign was super, super famous and super popular. It was the Got Milk campaign. And the thing, if you look at this picture, there are some trends that they used. There were many, many, many Got Milk ads. Do any of you recognize these ads and maybe recognize some of the visual hooks that they are using so that on a very quick glance, you know that this is a Got Milk ad? You know, it got really, really famous. So, right, exactly. So Amina, yes. And Sandra, milk on the lip. Okay, so every celebrity, every person that did it had the milk mustache. What else? What else did you see this? Yes, exactly, Laura, the white text. What else? There's more. Yes. Oh, beautiful. The central placement of photography. Exactly. That. Okay. Charlene, that's perfect. Lisa's, they're looking at the viewer. So all the pictures, somebody is facing front, looking at the viewer, staring at the camera. Jory, absolutely. The dark, plain, very simple background. And then the funny thing, the thing that that all of the designers are obsessed with is look at that font. Look at the font that says Got Milk. You might not have even noticed it now because it's now become a font that's been out there in the world and people have seen. But when these ads came out, this was either a brand new font or a font that no one had really used in any public or popular advertising. So this font was really, really unique for the time. And so it's because these became iconic. They were so consistent and so predictable. So just recently, within the last few years, someone created these ads. And it was for some organization called Kith Treats. And they were able to, I don't have to say personally, don't know if this is legal, don't know if they're infringing on copyrights. They may be, but they look at how they did that because it's so iconic. They were able to map what they were doing to that. They've got, I think this is a famous person. I probably don't know who he is. Looking forward, milk mustache, same, oh, is that who it is? I'm like, who is that? I know he's famous, but a famous person staring forward, same typography, same neutral background. And they basically co-opted off of this other famous ad. And I would call it brand jacking. Don't know how well that worked for them, but because there's all these visual hooks, instantly anyone that sees this is going to know they're going to get the joke. So now when you're doing all of these things, you've got, it's one thing to have your logo, but you've got colors. We talked about fonts. We talked about photography. All of these different things are out there and you're marketing, you're executing with them. One of the things that makes it really, really helpful is to create a brand style guide. And so this is an example of what a brand style guide is. And it sounds all fancy, but really what it is you make these decisions and you gather them together so that people know what to do. You may be sending your logo to somebody that makes mugs. You may be sending it out to somebody that makes a trade show booth, or maybe you're a museum and you're making exhibit designs. It could be anything. And so you want people to be using the right color and keeping it consistent. So which ones do you use? Do you have a primary logo? Do you have a secondary logo? Is there, you want to keep a clear space around your logo so that design does not encroach on your logo and on your brand. And then this is always my favorite page of a brand book. It's called Logo Violations. We always call it the Don't Taunt the Logo page. You know, don't mess with this logo. Don't rearrange the order. Don't twist it. Don't tilt it. Don't give it a crazy glow or a bevel. Like, the logo is the logo. The more you fool around with your logo, the less it's going to work to be a visual hook for you. Like, most of us aren't Google, and we don't all have the luxury of changing color, changing imagery, changing our logo and having it still read as our logo, because the logo and the brand is very tightly tied to how you execute it in the world. And unless people have a very deep familiarity with your icon, with your imagery, changing it up is just is gonna water down your brand. Colors. And then how do images get used? This, for example, is an art museum, and there are rules for this art museum about imagery that cannot have logos put on top of them. They have art that is, it's famous art. So you can't just drop your logo on top of a very famous painting. So there's rules, and it's important that anyone that comes after us knows that. And you can easily give this book to somebody, because ultimately there's a lot of stuff you have to do, right? So we've got this brand, we've got these colors, we've got these fonts, and now we got to make stuff. We have to make a lot of stuff usually. And a lot of times it's all moving really, really fast. We have to cover awareness. We have to get new people to know about us. We have to engage them, get them interested. We've got to convert them into whatever, donors, students, volunteers, members. That's a conversion. And then ultimately, once you get those people, you've got to retain them. All of that takes a lot of moving parts. And you can use any of these tools, your website, your email marketing. All of these things are tactics, they're executions of your brand. So making some decisions so that you can have some plan for how it gets executed is really important. I often say that you want your plan, your brand guidelines, to be a cattle chute. You've got all of these things that you could do. How are you going to narrow it down and say, nope, we're not doing that. No, we're not going to have, bells and whistles over here. We're not going to have these things. This is the range. But if you make that range really, really tight, you either need a team of people that are going to be monitoring, policing, and managing that brand, or you need a central place where all things related to your brand are happening, like a team, like all things that are executed happen within the marketing department. And you can't distribute work and say, well, you can make your own PowerPoint presentation and you can go ahead and get mugs made for your event. You're going to have to centralize it and execute it yourself, or you're going to have to make some decisions that give people a little bit of room. Okay, if you're doing an invitation, there's this set of rules that you can have. But having no rules is going to guarantee that someone's going to make something that they think looks awesome that is totally not in alignment with your brand. And then the more that stuff goes out there, the more trouble you're going to have having your imagery that you do have branded be associated with the work that you do. So here's an example of that. So this is an organization that we did a rebranding for in 2010. And so this is the work that we created kind of between 2010 and maybe 2013. So this is old now. This is a decade old. And some of it is looking dated now. Some of it still, I think, still looks pretty good. But their logo is still their logo. But the thing is, we did this in 2010. We worked with them for 3 years. We did the strategy, we did the brand, we did the core executional materials. But they were a 9-person organization. They just didn't have the bandwidth or the budget to turn everything over to us and have us execute things for them forever. They needed to be able to take that brand and own it themselves and execute it in all the gazillion ways they needed to execute it. And so over the years, this is some of the more recent work that they've done. And I think it's so interesting to kind of look at a brand in its origin. Let's go back one. This is how we created it. Look at the blue and green color palette. Look at the font choice that we have. Look at even the little tiny details. See the little kid that has the telescope up. Notice that his shirt is green. Well, let me tell you, that was a stock photo. His shirt wasn't green. But with some photo editing, you can bring your imagery into the brand, even if you don't have a charity water level budget to go out and get professional photographers and send them to Africa to take amazing photos for you. You can get a stock photo and go out to some place like Fiverr and find a photo editor and say, hey, here's my color I want to match. Can you please edit this photo so it works within our brand palette? It really makes a huge difference. And as you can see, they've continued. They have cute pictures of children wearing blue and green. They've kept the font up. But they've expanded it. They have some different graphic images that they use. They have different illustrations that they use, and they've been able to evolve their brand while still staying within a close enough range that it still feels very much like them almost 12 years later. So getting to that point is a process. One of the best things that I can recommend that you do is do a communication audit. And a communication audit is basically gathering everything up and taking a look at it all together. So the way that we do this is that we actually create a set of Dropboxes, a set of folders in Dropbox, and we have our clients just fill up these folders, fill, get examples, fill them all up. And then this is a brand new thing that we're trying. This wasn't in the last time I did this presentation. There's a tool out there called Miro, and there's a free version of it that's amazing. And what you can do is you can take those images and put them into different areas on a board that functions kind of like you're laying it all out on your conference room table, because that's what we used to do. You know, we used to be able to travel and go to places. So one thing that you can do is just get all your stuff, lay it all out on the table, take a look at it with your team, you know, or if you are a remote team or you have people working in different locations, you can do the same thing visually. But ultimately, it's about gathering everything up and taking a look at it and saying, does this work for our audience? Does this work? Is this communicating the right message? Does this image help connect people to who we are and what we do? And ultimately, are the materials that we're providing delivering the experience that we want? And so to help you do that, I do have a little giveaway that I'm going to have for you. And the team over at Keela is actually going to be sending me your names. And so making sure that they know that you want to get this is important. And then we will send this out to you. As soon as we get the names out, we will send an email out and send you a little copy of this. This is what we call our communication audit checklist. And it's basically a little cheat sheet to help you think about all the things that you might want to gather and put together onto your conference room table or your virtual table. Because there's things that you might not even think about, your fundraising, your emails, your banners, all these little things. And it can be helpful to just have a little checklist. So that is what I have for you today. I hope I've saved enough time for some questions. And what do we have in here? So I know that there's probably at least one question in. Are there other questions that you guys have? So Ishay, do you have questions coming in for me? Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with the ones that are just coming into chat. No problem. So Amina is asking, where do you start if you are new and have no budget? So the answer, Amina, is simple. Like don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. That's the number one thing that I would say is think about how you can be simple. And no, it's funny. There's one thing I almost put in here, but I didn't put in today. So we have a client that started up and they worked for, maybe a year, maybe 2 years in the behavioral health space, residential housing for people, for a behavioral health community. And they grew and they grew and they had oh my God, the ugliest logo you could possibly imagine. But they produced a great experience and they figured out who their audience really was. And when they grew enough so that they were ready to move to the next level, that's when they brought us in and we updated their logo and made them more professional. My advice to you is if you're doing it yourself or trying to keep it on budget, keep things as simple as possible so that when you have more history, when you know more about your audience, when you have more budget to get where you want to go, there's less untangling to do. It's less rebranding and more brand focusing. The more you have to do to untrain your audience off of one thing and shift them over to something new is going to be it's going to be harder, longer, and more cost and more expensive. As you can see, like if you imagine I showed you the Starbucks logo and then I showed you their original logo. Well, there were like 8 different versions in between. You can evolve, and that's totally okay. And making small incremental changes to your brand along the way as you have the budget to professionalize, and then utilize the cost-effective solutions. Utilize things like Squarespace for a website. Utilize things like Fiverr to get small little projects done by actual professional people. Or Canva. Canva is also awesome. Canva is phenomenal. But I also say Canva is a great tool, but you can make really ugly stuff even with a great tool. So if you ever get to the point where you're like, my skill set is tapped out, even with Canva, there are still some inexpensive places like Upwork, like Fiverr. There's, gig type places that you can go. And I would highly recommend that you do that versus necessarily going and asking for favors. When you start cultivating a culture of, poor me, I'm a nonprofit, we don't have anything, can you do things for us as a favor? You're training yourself to think small. You're training yourself to expect things to be done for you for free. And honestly, quality work isn't done for free. And so even if you're paying $5 or $10, you're really starting to think like a business. I know you're a nonprofit, but thinking like, hey, it costs money to generate the income you have. And if you can get that into your mindset, you can then get your donors to support that as well. If you don't get your donors to believe that operations are required in order for you to run your organization, you're going to be doing your work for free, not just us. So that's what I think.
So Mary,
go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say we have 2 more questions to answer. So Mary Lou Myler said, would you brand yourself specifically to your donors?
Oh, Mary Lou, that's a great question. So you need to brand yourself perfectly for the number one audience you need in order for you to thrive. For some people, that's your donors. For some people, it's a specific category of your donors. For some people, it's students. For some people, it's members. It's very important to go through the exercise and really look at, we call them desirable actions in our organization. What we take people through is making them write a list of what are all the desirable actions you need people to be taking in order to thrive. It's a great exercise for you all to do. Literally get a group of people together and brainstorm. And to be a desirable action, there needs to be a verb. Like you have to have it can't just be like donors. That's an audience, not an action. Give us money. Give, action. Come to our event. Show up here. Sign up to volunteer. What do you need people to be doing? It needs to be an action-based thing, not just like build awareness. That's not an action. That's a generalization. What's the outcome? What is the outcome that you're looking for? So write a whole list of those actions, right? And then put that away and then write a whole list of all your audiences. And then go back and look at your actions and say, out of all of these things that we need people to do, what's the one thing that if this didn't happen, we'd be in trouble? And what's the one thing that if we could take this thing and 10x it or 100x it, we'd be golden? Start there. And now that obviously that's not your marketing. Remember, we have to separate the idea of marketing from branding. Marketing is the tactics, the things that you do. Branding is who you are and who you're for. And by putting that squarely in the center of your circle, the most important action taken by the most important people, you're so much more likely to hit all the rings of people that care about you before you fall off the target. The biggest mistake that we see people make is they go, oh, we have these people that love us, but they're 70-year-old, 78-year-old white women. We don't want them anymore. We need fill in the blank. We want the 20-year-olds. We want the millennials. And they jump all the way from these lovers all the way out to the outside edge of a target. And when you're shooting for the outside edge of a target, you're more likely to miss entirely. And the more your attention is focused on the outside, the less attention you're paying to the people who are helping you thrive today. So what we talk about is looking for those people who are at the center of your circle, and then figuring out who's in the next ring, and then the next ring. And when you can understand the values that are buried underneath the desirable action and underneath the demographics, you can use those values to grow into other audiences without going out to the masses, because the masses want you to run karate lessons. Like the masses want you to have an ice cream stand. Like all the people want all the things. If you start going out to new people that way, you're going to end up super shallow and trying to help everybody, and marketing, as I love to say, like there's a sale on commas. You know, if you're a banker or a lawyer or a baker or like pigs or cows, or then we're the perfect organization for you. And the shallower you become, the less believable you become and the less memorable you are. Okay, I know we have one more question.
So Alan Maz said, any tools to do deep dive on figuring out audience?
Call me. So we do a lot of work. This is really a lot of work that we do, is figuring out your audience. But I'm going to give you one trick that works great. So we just talked about finding out these desirable actions. So when you come and you find your desirable action, maybe it's your $10,000 donor. Maybe it's this event that, like, when people come to this event, if we can get more people to come to this event, maybe it's signing up for this program. Find that desirable action, find that thing, and then go to your database, go to Keela. And this is the beauty of having an amazing, functional, great database. You go into that database and you export a list of people that have taken that action. And then you look for those people that have taken that action a whole bunch of times. I like to use the number 6. Every organization is a little bit different. But when you find people that have taken a desirable action a number of times, and then you take that group of people and you interview them, you talk to them, you have a 30 to 45-minute interview with them, and you will find, even if you talk to 10 of them, amazing things will come out, and you will learn a massive amount of stuff about what they value and what they care about, that you can then build back up and survey to see if your rest of your audience agrees with these 10 people. And that's where you start to get to understand. Does that help? Let me know if that's giving you that. Okay, what else do we have? And do we have any more time, or am I out of time?
No, we have time. We have some questions. So Laura McDonald says, what design software would you recommend for a small nonprofit?
Oh, okay. So I'm a designer by training. So of course I'm going to recommend that everyone invest in Adobe InDesign, Adobe Creative Suite. But trust me, I get it's super crazy expensive. The one that I'm hearing the most about, if that's just out of the price range, and it's not just about price range, there's also a learning curve. It's designed for professionals, because people go through art school to learn how to design and learn how to use these programs. It's challenging. So if immersing yourself in Adobe Creative Suite is too much for you, there's a product on the market now called Affinity Designer, and Affinity Designer is the parallel to InDesign. There's probably Affinity Photo. So there's a suite of products similar to Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, and Adobe InDesign, and it's called Affinity Designer. I'm hearing great things about how it works a lot like those professional tools at a fraction of the cost. The other thing I would also suggest to you is, if you really, really want to dive into Adobe Creative Brief, TechSoup is an organization that can get you a discounted version of Creative Cloud, of the Creative Suite for nonprofits. So that may be a place of looking for, like, well, what would it cost there? But think about, it's no good to bring something in that you look at it and go, I don't even know where to start. This program's too complicated. So maybe trying the waters. I think it's like the Affinity Designer is significantly cheaper. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, Isha, are you still here?
Sorry, I was reading that out, but I was
okay, got it. I was gonna say, I'm like, okay, it's really quiet. Can you do that one more time for me?
Yeah, so Charlene Warren asked, with rebranding, how important do you think it is to stick with a similar color scheme? We're currently using a bright orange that no one is really attracted to, but would it be important to incorporate it, not
I,
not
yeah,
in the logo
mhm.
and brand for consistency, to incorporate it in the logo and brand for consistency?
Okay, so Shalene, the answer is, of course, your favorite. It depends. So there's a lot of value to keeping it in the same color if people really associate you with the color. Like if Home Depot all of a sudden decided that they wanted to be pink, I think that that would, they've got a lot of money, of course, and they could probably sell it, but that would be a hard transition. Ultimately, what you have to think about is, are you looking for a brand evolution or a brand revolution? So you're doing a rebranding. Why? Are you doing a rebranding? Is it a visual layer rebranding, a visual identity rebranding, where you're changing your logo, updating your website, and making your graphic design look better? Or did you go all the way back to audience? Did you look at your message? Are you repositioning yourself under a new flag? Are you putting a stake in a sand somewhere else? Are you shifting it? Are you adjusting it? Do you have a new North Star? If you're using this visual rebrand in order to be a hook to say, hey, we've changed and now we're going to show you how, sometimes there's tremendous value in making a ginormous change. If you are literally trying to like clean up outdated stuff and do what a lot of times people call a brand refresh, sometimes going too far too fast can leave your people behind. So another thing to think about as you're choosing this color is, honestly, if people really hate this color, sometimes you just need to pull the band-aid off, deal with the fact that it's going to be a longer haul retraining people to adapt to this new identity, and just like, you have to start somewhere. I would hate to say you stick with the orange and have everybody just still really hate it, and a year from now go, we still don't like this logo and we're changing again. You do not want to do that. So really think about it like, does everyone really hate this color, and it's worth the pain of the extra work it's going to take to indoctrinate people to the new image in order to change it? Or is it better to say, we're going to take some small micro steps away, like like a Starbucks or somebody did, and we're going to keep the orange but change the icon, change the graphics, and just evolve more slowly. Maybe you keep the orange but reduce its prominence in the imagery. I don't know what your logo looks like, but those are some ideas there. Okay, I think we have one last question.
Yes.
Do we?
Yeah,
Yes.
we have one last question. Shona asked, how would you create an effective brand when your charity represents two medical conditions?
Oh, okay. So Shauna, I would have to say that's a more complicated question than I can answer in a question. What I would say is, work with a brand advisor. Find somebody that can help you navigate that can help you understand where your community is now, what your priority is, and how you find the commonality in your story so that you can have a hub at the center of your wheel. Look for like, that's what I would do. I would look for, okay, you've got these two medical conditions. Are they completely different medical conditions that have no relationship with each other? Is there some like value that is shared among your audiences of why, like, what's the why do you represent two medical conditions? You've got to figure out what the story is and how you can make that clear to your audience about why you do what you do, or you're really not, you'll be marketing, but you're not going to be effectively branding. I hope that makes sense.